Music review, Nursery Cryme, 1971, by Genesis. A brief history of Genesis and my connection with them to start. As a young 16-year-old, I, with some close friends, started to see live music locally at the Angel Hotel in Godalming, Surrey. I lived about 10 miles from Godalming, and behind the main building of the hotel there was a large room that had been converted to a music venue, and it had a bar, of course, and it was held about 200 people when full to capacity. And in 1970 I happened to hear a band called Genesis perform there. Genesis were formed 3 years earlier, however, by 5 young men from a Charterhouse public school that was near Godalming. They, of course, were Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel, plus Andrew Phillips and John Mayhem. Mayhem was on the drums and Phillips on guitar, but initially this collection of would-be musicians were interested in folk music as such, folk rock music, and they also had another interested party, one Jonathan King, who was a sort of manager come producer, come promoter for the band, but it was very much in its infancy at that stage. Anyway, their first album was recorded and released in 1968. By then they'd split with King, and they'd signed a recording contract with Charisma shortly after that, and after the first album, then released Trespass in 1970. This is when their music became more progressive rock as such, and the band started to tour relentlessly, and that's when I came across them, really, and I saw them repeatedly at the Angel on a Sunday evening. I do remember some of the material, particularly the last finale as such to their set, which was called The Knife, and it was a particularly powerful rock piece, and particularly striking was Gabriel's, who was starting to dress theatrically. However, after that first album, which was reasonably well received, the band felt that the drummer wasn't really up to it, and Phillips decided to part company, and so they basically continued for a short period as a 3-piece, with Banks trying to cover the guitar bits, and eventually they decided to recruit 2 others quickly or fold, and an ad in the Melody Maker led to them actually finding Phil Collins on drums and percussion, and Steve Hackett on guitar, and they were installed into the next project, the 1971 album Nursery Cryme, which is what this review is about. It has to be said that I did see them at that time, and but they actually plunged themselves into creating this album by retreating to Luxford House, which was a countryside mansion in the middle of southeast England somewhere, and I recently saw a video when the band are recalling all their early albums and describing what was happening, and they all commented that at that particular moment they recalled that Luxford House was just a rat-infested mess, but it was used to get lyrics down and get sort of a musical backtracks down to lay the groundwork for the recording that took place at Trident Studios a little bit later. So that's the backdrop then to the band Genesis and this particular album. I will now move on and go through the tracks one at a time and refer to the lyrics, which of course were vital with this prog rock band Genesis. So this is the first track on the Nursery Cryme, the second album by Genesis. There's a lot of material on the internet about this album, but I am going to give my sort of two pennyworth with regard to the musical impact that it had on me. But I will say that when I get to the lyrics, I'm going to refer to the information that I obtained on the internet, which was offered to the public by the members of the band, the interpretation of the lyrics to the songs. I think this is justifiable for me to reinterpret them against the knowledge that the band are sharing with music fans would be absolutely ridiculous and pointless. So that will follow. But firstly, the musical box. As I listen to it, I have memories of sort of adults. My father, for example, telling me children's stories in the comfort of my bed just before bedtime, fairy tales, fantasies to an extent, and Gabriel's tale is of a similar ilk, but it's much more adult and much more nightmarish and holds some ghastly images. But as the piano leads us in to the strumming guitar, gently introduced by Hackett, Gabriel's vocals create a mystique. It's beautifully sung by Peter, and with the mix at both the front and the back, as the mood is created, I find it absolutely enchanting to listen to. The flute is also introduced into the mix as the voices sort of serenade the medieval courtyard sound as it slowly builds, delicately led by Hackett, before Collins's crunching drums stomp its authority briefly on the track. The pace then quickens with Banks's organ at the forefront as the rhythm quickens before the squeal of harshness hustles at you, your ear senses. It's really quite breathtaking. And the bridge takes us back to the beginning, of course, as the surge is then repeated, mimicking the violence depicted in the lyric and of course the front cover. Hackett is then awe-inspiring in the final verse, with Gabriel's delivery like a minstrel and a vampire maybe, and Bang's organ starts its final thrust as Gabriel's frantic scream immerses you in some sort of nightmarish, grisly murder. It's touchingly cathartic, I found. So, some thoughts then on the musical box. And I got this from the internet, but I'm going to read it through because I think it is essential, really, in interpretation. The lengthy piece describes the musical box, of course, describes a macabre story placed in Victorian Britain, where a young boy Henry is accidentally decapitated by his friend Cynthia while playing croquet, as depicted on the cover of the album. Returning to the house, Cynthia plays Henry's old musical box, which unleashes the spirit of Henry as an old man. Henry has become sexually frustrated and attempts to seduce Cynthia. And the nurse enters the room, hurls the music box at the wall, destroying both it and Henry. You will note that from the lyric, Gabriel reflects on a nursery rhyme, Old King Cole, as well, which is quite significant. The song, the music box, originated when Phillips, the original guitar player in the band, he often wrote with Rutherford on 12-string acoustic guitars, and Rutherford had begun to experiment with unorthodox guitar tunings and had the top 3 strings tuned into F sharp. This is for musicians, which provided the jangly sound heard in the opening and the chord that signalled the start of the electric guitar solos. The tuning influenced the title of an acoustic piece, pronounced F sharp, that became the basis of the musical box, which was further developed after Phillips's departure. The opening section of the song features both Rutherford and Banks on 12 strings. Okay, so I think that gives you some sort of perspective on the song, the musical box. Just finally, one point, that Gabriel was committed to incorporating themes of violence and sex into the lyrics, and Collins inspired to play a rolling drum part during the middle section, and he copied that by and large from the Weaver's Answer, a song originally done by Family a few years previous. So that's my interpretation on the musical box. The second track, For Absent Friends, has Phil Collins on vocals. It's a very short track and a complete contrast really to the first song and the subsequent songs. A melodic respite as Collins gives us a hint of his talent as a singer. It's very much a storyteller's song. The guitar, subtly linked with the keyboards and the voices, is folk-like in its nature, and after 1 minute 41 it's all over. So too for Absent Friends. Lyrics, pretty simple really after the more complex interpretation of the musical box. This is really a sweet little tale of the importance of the church for 2 widows as they reflect on their husbands who are passed on. There's some nice words on this that creates a nice picture of Sunday and the importance as you grow old in hold tightly to your religious beliefs. And then to close the first side, of course, we have the return of the giant Hogweed. The Mellotron hauntingly starts off this tour de force with exciting cymbals from Collins before a standard rock beat driven by organ and lead guitar with Gabriel's vocals over the top. Characteristic for Genesis lovers, this one. They build the crescendo and then it explodes. The guitar and keyboard mix, very much a feature of Genesis style down the years, but there's no excessive use of soloing, unlike with the band Yes or ELP, who overindulged the individual players. Genesis much more cohesive, the sum greater than the parts, and the skipping nature of the beat links in with those crisp short solos. I love the rolling piano on here, very classic in nature, as the bridge to Hackett's cute guitar. It still creates a feel of countryside wealth and austerity here, and the outro's full of vigour and fear, lyrically linked. A real child fantasy emerging through the words. Tolkien came to mind, but the crushing organ washes over the full-blooded rhythm, with Collins absolutely awesome as the track draws to a close. Now the lyrics to The Return of the Giant Hogweed. Well, you really do need to have a vivid imagination, and that's exactly what Gabriel brought to the party here. It's a song that warns of the spread of the toxic plant Heraclilium madagassi anum, whatever that might be, after it was captured in Russia and brought to England by a Victorian explorer. Though the real plant is extremely toxic and dangerous, the song's lyrics are a humorous exaggeration, suggesting the plant is attempting to take over the human race. And believe that if you wish, but certainly it led to a tremendous piece of work. And I'm just flipping back now to see if there's anything additional that I can add to this interpretation. It reflects in the lyrics that the explorer donated the plant, the hogweed, to the Kew Gardens, a very famous place in London for plant life, and it's altogether a very amusing little tale. So to the second side then. The first track is Seven Stones. It's a dreamy, slow tempo that arrives to your ears before Peter Gabriel hits the high notes with his vocal, and then the organ drives the song again, with Collins impressive on drums as the sound becomes drenched in arrangements as Banks swallows the rhythm. There's a quirky flute guitar interlude before the song sort of restarts. It certainly has a seafaring feel to it, and the mellotron takes you, the listener, on a voyage as 5 minutes of exquisite music concludes. A very underrated gem on this album, I find. Lyrically, I think it's a message about life's journeys and how one man's grief can be another's laughter, how someone who works hard can be conned by others who are sly and mischievous. It's about consequences. It's a mournful tale. Success is a mixture of good fortune based on random effects and chance. The next track, Harold the Barrel, well, it bounces in, and you know we're about to experience a comedic jaunt, possibly at a circus or a fun fair, but it's nothing to do with that at all. There's a great singing duet between Peter and Phil that was apparently recorded on one track, so they can't be separated. That owed a nod to Lennon and McCartney, I thought, and it's absolutely wonderful. Banks' piano is magnificent, real classically inspired, and the thumping rhythm echoes the multitude of emotions as sang through the lyrics. And it's all played with gusto. Lyrically, well, Wikipedia relates that it's a song with black humour regarding a man contemplating suicide by jumping from a building. And when you read the lyrics, this certainly seems likely. The events is highlighted as a news show or an event on TV as attempts are made to rescue the crazed man, his mother arrives, the BBC arrives, local politicians, and of course the police. It's all very quirky, very, very amusing, and I love it. Up next then is Harlequin. Mike Rutherford put this track together. It opens up with some delicious harmonies that reminded me of Crosby, Stills and Nash a little bit, and they are exquisitely presented. Nice guitars in there, 12-string guitars played by Rutherford and Hackett. Another 3 minutes of nice music really, but it doesn't seem to go anywhere. The singing harmonising is divine, and Peter's flute a highlight. To use a metaphor, the singing is almost like choir boys delivering a hymn. That's perhaps a slight exaggeration. Lyrically, it describes a canvas of colours, a landscape maybe to be viewed by children as the colours change to fit the time or the season. So to the final piece then, the Fountain of Salmacis. The hypnotic keyboards embrace the beginning, and Banks referred to his increasing interest in using the mellotron. It crushes down on your senses, and then Peter marches in forward, one foot in front of the other, with his tail right out of something that we could have rereading in Tolkien. And the crashing rhythm section keeps the senses alert. Collins is again a revelation, I think, and what a good drummer he is. The sound accelerates into a metamorphosis of keyboards, mellotrons and guitars. The guitars immerse themselves in the punchy rhythm and spiral, and Hackett's guitar particularly eloquent here. But Gabriel's heartbeat vocals soar. At 5 minutes the sound goes up another notch. This is powerful mystical rock music, and then the organ shimmering restarts us and we approach the final run, and then the bass and the eerie harmony and Hackett's crushing spectacular guitar solo, which bleeds with pain and roars. It's heart-wrenching almost, emotionally, and it brings a special piece of choral-style music to a conclusion. As to the story, the Fountain of Salmacis tells the story of Salmacis, the Greek mythological Naiad, who became the first hermaphrodite. It originated from a short rundown passage that Banks had come up with while at university. The track makes use of the mellotron, as I said, with a significant influence from King Crimson's debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King. Banks thought the instrument greatly complemented his piece when combined with the organ, and it became the basis for the Fountain of Salmacis, which then became a complete song as a result of live jams by the band. Hackett particularly enjoyed coming up with the ending guitar solo, and it really is quite memorable. So that's my summary of the tracks, just as a way of putting it all back together in one piece. This is in fact their third album. I think I might have referred to it as being the second. Of course, the preceding album was Trespass, and the first one was from Genesis to was it Eternity or Infinity? I'm not quite sure, but anyway, it's the one that really wrapped itself round me, and I became a passionate lover for Genesis music. Of course, the regular viewing of this band around about the Trespass and Nursery Cryme times live in this very, very small club as a 16, 17-year-old was a particular factor in develop this passion for this album, and it's the one I still play more than ever, even though I may well have also some great desire to listen to The Lamb Dies Down on Broadway and some of the Collins sang albums. But that's my lot anyway, the 1971 Nursery Cryme. Just a small point about the cover. The cover was designed and illustrated by one Paul Whitehead, who also did Trespass and the next album, Foxtrot, and it depicts characters and scenes based on the musical box, and Coxhill, the manor house with the croquet lawn, which is in itself based on the Victorian home that Gabriel grew up in. Well, now you know. On the inner sleeve, it resembled an old photo album with each song having its own little panel, along with an illustrated picture. And I'll try to get a copy of that to put in the pitch element of this review. So that's my lot anyway. That's Nursery Cryme.